first of all, I'm pleasantly surprised that I was worried there were only going to be like 3 or 4 people, and then I would have wasted so much paper printing all these handouts. I know it's a long weekend, so you probably wanted to get an early jump on that. As boring as the title sounds, I promise that it's practical and that we're going to try to tie it in as much as possible in different areas. And I want to spend some time at the end focusing on how you could use this in an interview, which is something most of you are going to have to do pretty soon. So just a little bit about me before I get into this. I graduated from Mansfield University in Pennsylvania with a music ed degree, and I taught in the public school system in New York and Pennsylvania for 4 years, and then did a master's degree now here. The system that I'm going to talk about, I used it in New York at the elementary school. I used it in Pennsylvania at the elementary school, and it works both places. So I feel pretty confident in it. So it's authentic student assessment, but it's under the Arts Propel paradigm. So Arts Propel was a 5-year collaboration among researchers from the Educational Testing Service, Harvard Project Zero, and teachers and administrators from the Pittsburgh Public Schools. And what they did was they went into the Pittsburgh schools and they were trying to reevaluate instruction and assessment in the music classroom. They wanted to make students' learning more visible to the students, and they wanted to make the assessment process itself foster further learning. What they found was that the most learning occurred when students were able to generate their own music, whether it's performing, composing, mapping, listening activities, listen discerningly to their own performing or composing or to other people's music, and thinking critically and assessing what they're producing or hearing. They ended up streamlining that, and they came up with production, perception, and reflection. They found that when these 3 things were integrated, it's when the most learning took place. The production element of it, rehearsing, performing, improvising, composing, designing works of art. Perception is noticing connections and making discriminations among works of art. And then reflection, thinking about the process of making art. Now, it has to all be integrated. So while they're performing, before they perform, they have perceptions about what they need to work on. After they perform, they reflect on it. And then their reflection leads into the next perception before they perform again. So it's this ongoing process. Okay, so that's basically what they found from Arts Propel. So authentic assessment. Authentic assessment is assessing the progress of students while they're actively involved in knowledge-seeking activity. So it's highly performance-based, which is something that you'll probably have to use. Anybody that's taken music education courses, it always comes up dealing with how do you assess performing groups, whether it's a soloist, chamber group, or large ensemble. It's difficult to do. Authentic assessment stimulates real-life situations, and it is criterion reference, meaning that individual achievement is measured in relation to specific criteria. What can authentic assessment do? It can document student progress and their perceptions about progress. It can establish curriculum and instructional priorities, and it fosters future learning. It raises the quality of music learning by making learning an individualized experience, allowing students to have decision-making power, promotes critical thinking skills, and allows students to apply as well as synthesize knowledge. So before we get into it, and we are going to go through the process of assessing something just under the same system, but this preparing for assessment, I was reading Dr. Brophy's book, Developing the Child's Decision, and there's a great section in there about preparing for assessment. Most teachers, when they do assessment, the kids will come in and they'll say, okay, we're going to do assessment today. They have no idea that it's happening, so they don't perform very well. And the key about this is to make it well known to them when they're going to do it, when it's going to happen, and how they're being assessed. So to prepare for this, we need to determine what you want to measure, target a specific behavior or concept, set and know your criteria well in advance, know what you're looking for, prepare rubrics and or scoring techniques, think of all the possibilities that might occur, determine your record-keeping strategy, how we keep track, especially if there are hundreds of students. If you want to assess a band that has 75 students, you better know what you're going to do going into it, because there's just so many. And allowing students to apply as well as synthesize knowledge. Determine your materials for the assessment and inform your students. You have to let them know that this is coming, so they perform their best. All right, so we're actually going to put this in action. And if you look at the second page of your handout, there's a rubric, and then there is a graph on the back. Now, we can debate any of the specific things under playing posture, embouchure, or air support. These are just things that I came up with. So if I wrote something under air support and you disagree with it, that's fine. This is just the system that I was using when I was working with fourth grade students in New York. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to focus on 3 sets of criteria in beginning instrumental lessons. Now, I use the example of trumpet, but it can work for flute, it can work for clarinet, any instrument. We had mallet percussion checklists, we had snare drum checklists. Each instrument had their own rubric. And we found that if you focus on playing position, which is just posture, embouchure, and air support, if those 3 things are in place, they're going to play their instrument well at an early age. If you have, at the end of 4th grade, all of your instrumentalists that are playing with proper embouchure, posture, and air support, they're going to sound good. And what I did was, I like to phrase these things as if the student is reading it and then checking it off. So instead of just putting your back is straight, your feet are flat on the floor, I like to phrase it, my back is straight as I sit in my chair, my feet are flat on the floor, my elbows are away from my side. So as they're assessing themselves and they're reading this, when they read it, it actually makes a lot of sense to them. So, how this works. Now, scoring rubric, I need to be very clear here. When I use the scoring rubric, I didn't do this for grades. They weren't graded on this. So when I talk about numbers, or I talk about where it says accomplished or above average or average, this is not grading stuff. This had nothing to do with my grading system. This is just something that I used to get them to get these 3 things to play as well as possible. So there are 5 sets of criteria for each thing: posture, embouchure, air support. If they're able to check off all 5, that's accomplished. They're only able to check up 4, above average, average, below average, undeveloped, deficient. If you look at it, each one has its own information underneath it. So the idea is if a kid comes in and they play and they only get 2 out of 5 on their posture, it's below average, and then they have to focus on those other 3 things. You'll notice at the bottom there's the goals. So after the assessment, they would put the date for the next assessment, and they actually have to write in what their goal is. So if they come in and they play, and their elbows are in at their side, then they would write down, next assessment, I got to get my elbows out away from my side, from my posture, things like that. So as you can see, with the long list, it's over a period of time. And I did the assessments once a month. We did it every month, every student. So on the other side of that is the graph. Now, what happens is, you have the date at the bottom here, and they take their rubric and they count their checks, and then they flip over to that graph, so the playing position graph. So if they had 3 checklists, obviously then they have to go here to average, and they plot their point. Over time, they see if they're improving, if they're plateauing, if they get to the top, but then the next month they got a little lazy and they started to drop back down. It's critical for them to be able to see over a long period of time how they're developing in these areas. Now, they plot their point, and then I assess them and I plot my point on the same sheet of paper. So they might come here and put their dot at 4. You know, they think it's above average, but when I review it, I found that no, they're missing some things they just didn't notice. They're actually at 2. So then I put my dot right there, and I can leave comments for them right on their sheet. So they see where they think they are, they see where I think they are, and it's just this collaborative process. And then, so talking about individualized assessment, each kid would then have their own sheet, and it's just one sheet of paper. And this could last for half of the school year. So by the time they get 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, by the time they leave the elementary school, each kid would only have 3 or 4 sheets of paper. And you could show to an administrator or to parents their progress over time and work it that way. Does that make sense? Any questions about the checklist or the graph? The key is of them making comments and you making comments about the whole thing as it goes. Yeah?
What happens when they become accomplished, like at an early level?
Then they have to maintain that. And it's a great question because a lot of times kids, they'll make a lot of progress very early on, and then they plateau before they get to the top, or they get to the top and they just kind of fall off and they get lazy about some stuff. I see it's most notable with posture, because when you teach beginning lessons, you pound posture into their heads. And this could be for singing too. Everything I'm talking about is for this project is elementary music. You could apply the same concepts to singing, or for example, Josh Ball in the back who's helping me with all of the technology stuff. Anybody in here took conducting lessons from him, he did this exact same thing where he would record them and then they would assess themselves using the video. It's the exact same kind of thing. But for posture, you'll see kids, you show them all the right way to hold the instrument, the right way to sit up, and they're great for like 2 months. And then they get home and they can't find their music stand and they start playing with their music holder on their bed. And they're playing like this. And the next thing you know, they come in and the posture's a disaster. So then they can see that they're starting to lose it. And then they have to get it back up. And they all want to get it up to the top. I mean, they want to be excellent at what they do. So when they see their dogs down here and they're not going anywhere, they don't like that. They will try to fix those things. And the criteria is it's simple and it's clear. And they look at it and they know what they have to do. My fingers are curved in a C over my valves, and they watch the video and they see their fingers are flat, and they didn't get that check mark. So then they just know that they have to work on that. Any other questions about the graph or the chart?
How did the students receive this process? Was it tedious for them?
No, and what I did was I would introduce these things not all at the same time. They wouldn't get 15 criteria all at the same time. They'd come in for the first lesson, and they'd be like, okay, today we're going to talk a couple things about posture at the very beginning of the lesson. So I'd say, okay, your back needs to be straight, your feet need to be flat on the floor. If you're playing trumpet, your hand needs to be curved in a C. Okay, and then we would go into the plan. And the next week they come in and say, okay, now we need to talk a little bit about air support. You need to be breathing down here. If I see your shoulders coming up, that's a shallow breath. So we would add the criteria as we would go. They wouldn't get assessed in the very first month. It would be halfway through the first year after we've established all of these things. Part of the assessment process under Arts Propels, you have to put this stuff in the classroom. So in my room, my elementary room, I had all of these displayed, and what I did is I had like flower pots on the wall, and each pot was posture, embouchure, air support, and then each flower, each petal was the different criteria. It was very clearly displayed. And I would say stuff like, we want your tone to be beautiful, and if you can do these things, you will produce a beautiful sound, just like flowers do, or something like that. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So, go ahead and use that shit if you want. Be basic conducting next year. But and they'll see that, but it has to be visual. It has to be displayed all the time. And they come in, and they're constantly pounded with that. And then, so they're looking for those things. And then we would do it once a month. So these are elementary band lessons. So I would have 4 clarinet players come in, and we're actually going to do this, but how it works is one clarinet player would come in, set their chair up, and if you look in the back, there's an iPhone, and that little stand right there, that's all you have to use. That can actually get a pretty good video for what we're working with. But you'd have that set up, one kid comes in, he plays, the other kids are getting set up. Once he's done playing, you put the video on the computer in your room, kid sits down, he's watching his video and assessing himself while the next kid is playing. He's got headphones in so he can hear his video. So he's assessing himself. When he's done, goes back to his regular class. Next kid plays, watches the video. And they sit at the computer, they can watch the video as many times as they need to do this. And I have some videos on here that we're going to go through and make this process work. But okay, so any other questions about this paper before we go on to actually using it? Yeah?
But how often would you say you do these?
I did them once a month. And I started, and if they started in 4th grade, I waited until halfway through the year. And then we started. After I had all this stuff in place, they knew that this is what I was looking for. And it was, and again, I didn't do it for grading. I didn't make it seem like it was a test or anything. I would say we're going to do our assessments. It's just to see where you are in terms of these things. You're not getting a grade for it. You know, we just want to like see where we are. And they kind of like it because they get to watch themselves play once they see the video. They don't get to do that very often. But the key is you have, yeah?
When you say once a month, do you assess them once a month on all 15 of the criteria or just 5? Like
The whole thing. Well,
so you did all of it in one assessment?
Yeah, and once I play the video and talk about that, it'll make more sense.
Okay.
But it was once a month, and we did it for the first year 6 times. Next year, once they're in their second year playing, we would start right away. And you would find over summer they'd come back and there'd be a big drop off. and a lot of the things. So then you get to work on keeping it. They never get there and stay there the whole time. Very, very few of them do that. Okay, so what happens is they come in and they have to sit down and you record them play. And I would always ask them to play 3 excerpts from their book. So they would play like Hot Cross Buns, and then Sweetly Sings the Donkey, and Mary Had a Little Lamb. So we're actually we're gonna use the chart and we're gonna assess these videos. And I tried my hardest to play like a 5th grader, and those of you in the Wind Symphony know that that's not that hard for me. So I'm doing wrong things with my posture, wrong things with my armature. If you'd like to, you can use the checklist and the chart, and there's 3 videos, so we're actually going to assess my playing over 3 months along with the graph. And I have pencils and pens if anybody wants to. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. But it's just, something that's there for you. So does anybody need a pen or a pencil or anything? Would you like one? Anybody else? Okay. So, yeah. So I'm playing Hot Cross Buns, and whatever. These are from memory. Whatever the exercise that introduces the low B natural, I can't remember what it's called. And then Mary Had a Little Lamb. So you can check the chart, and we should be focusing on my embouchure, my posture, and the air support. Now, most people think air support's not really a thing you can assess visually, but it's pretty obvious if you're breathing after every note, if you're not sustaining notes with a full value. And if you see a lot of initial breath up here, that's not a good breath. That's not a breath I don't think anybody would consider what we want. So we can watch that. So again, you can make cracks about this if you want. I'm trying to play like a 5th grader on purpose. So here it is. This is the very first assessment. Josh was helping me record this. Like, he's trying not to crack up the whole time. That's very realistic. You see that. A lot of clam notes and starting and stopping and time dilation or whatever you want to call it. But so just to look at the posture, for me watching it, I noticed that the trumpet was at a bad angle, was low, and my fingers were flat like this. But my back was straight, my feet were flat, my elbows were out. So some things were good, but it was missing. So then I would get my own chart back, and I'd have a 3 out of 5. I might mark it at 4 out of 5. Teacher might come in and say, no, it's actually a 3. You need to work on these things. So then, for the next video, or the next month, I would know that I need to get my hand in the right position, and I need to make sure that I get my trumpet angle up. Okay? So then the next month comes, and the second assessment. This is later in the year, so now we've got some 8th notes. So hang on. My hand's actually curved, like whatever the system I wanted was. But some things actually got worse. So like my feet are a disaster. You can't tell because the chair's black. I'm leaning back in the chair. So some things that I had right the first time, I went and focused on the other things. Some of the other stuff slipped. Okay? Now, this is really important for the kids to watch this, but it's important for us too, because especially if it's an instrument that you're not as comfortable with. When I would assess flute players, I had to watch the videos over and over and over again, because I'd watch it one time and I'd be looking at their hands the whole time. And I wouldn't catch that they were taking a breath between every note, because I was so focused on what they looked like. So you can watch this several times, and you store it on your computer. They can watch it as much as they need to. Teacher can watch it as much as they need to. If the administrator wants to come in and see what they're doing, pop it up, show what you're doing, how it's advancing over time. So that was the second one, and then there's a third one. The embouchure was better that time too. So there are noticeable corrections happening. So this is the third month. It's really hard to keep a straight face with Josh going back and laughing at you while you're trying to play like that. But one of the key components of this is they only get a check mark if it's something they do every time, all the time. And again, what makes this authentic assessment is this is what they should be doing at home when they practice. It's just like a practice session at home when you're recording it in the classroom. There's nothing different. And they don't get credit for it if they come in and they do it some other time. They either do it right all the time or they don't get credit for it. So my back was fine. And then halfway through, I got tired and I didn't feel like concentrating on it. I leaned back in my chair. Well, they don't get credit for that. That has to be something they do all the time. And if they're doing it all the time, then they don't have to think about it. They just come in and it becomes natural. Does that make sense? Okay. So then, if you were doing this, I don't know if you were or not, there should be some sort of progression on all three of those things over time. Again, you would have your own dots. The student would have their dots. Trust me, very rarely do they line up to be the same thing. So that's this basic process. You go, yeah?
I'm sorry, I didn't get it right.
It's okay.
Are these taking place during class time, or are they taking place like before school, recess, lunchtime? Because if you have 30 kids in a class, how are you getting through them during the class?
Yeah. In New York and Pennsylvania, where I implemented this, they actually, for beginning band lessons, they got pulled out 4 or 5 at a time from their classes, once a week. And I had a rotating schedule, so they never missed the same class more than 2 or 3 times a year. And they would do their group lessons every week with an assessment time. I'd pull them out one at a time. And I showed this to the teachers. I mean, if you go in and you have a very clear idea of what you want to do, most other teachers will be very reasonable with wanting to do stuff like this. So, yeah, they would, like, they'd get pulled out of math, and then they would do it. And then the next month, they get pulled out of science or whatever. It was right along the same time as their weekly lessons. Now, I don't know how Florida does elementary band. I don't know if you get small group lessons. What? You don't get pulled out? There's no elementary band whatsoever. Middle school.
I just want to say I started media and I had the same experience as I said.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could.
I was in elementary band, but we had, like, it was part of the enrichment program. Like, the program was after school for students to stay, until 5, because their parents wanted them out, so.
Yeah.
I mean, this works for middle school and high school too. Like,
Yeah, so even though I'm using elementary band as an example for all of this, the same thing applies. You can do it for middle school individualized lessons. You could do it for high school. I showed it to the choir teacher that I worked with at Rocky Grove High School, and she would pull kids out of study halls for voice lessons, and she would do this. Josh Gall did this same thing with his conducting students, and I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. We never really talked about it. But then after a couple of weeks of noticing it, he would record them doing their conducting exercises, and then he'd put it on YouTube, and they'd have to go home, watch it on YouTube, give themselves a grade, and he'd give them a grade. Same thing. It's the same kind of process. So it doesn't have to be elementary band. Yeah, it is hard because you have to do it one-on-one. So if it's a huge class, it might be difficult to do. I don't know, but you might be in a situation where you have to work with small groups of students, and this is something that really works well with that. Sammy?
Yeah, I have one more question. So while watching this video, you evaluate the video and let the students do the mark of their own portion. In that case, I'm just wondering, the result of your side and the student side, like score, or similar or sometimes?
Most of the time they're different. Most of the time they inflate their score. And, you know, they'd come in and the kid would come in, the kids would come in, they'd play like this, and they give themselves a 5 out of 5. They just have to come on, watch it again. Read the list and watch it again. I've got you down to 2. Let's do it again. And but you might find that that's when you really find out if they don't get something. If they're constantly checking something off and you know it's wrong, then you know that they actually need more attention to that, and you have to explain it to them, maybe in a different way than you had been doing.
So then over the course of the year, did you notice your scores and student scores syncing up?
Yeah, they would over time, because then they start to see what you're looking for, because you're constantly explaining it to them. And again, it's in phrases that they can understand. My cheeks are not puffed out. So you'd say, watch the video. You checked it, but are your cheeks puffed out? Yeah. Okay. They're not supposed to be puffed out. So then you're constantly kind of working. And you would see, it's usually like this at some point. And there's sometimes they would actually, over time, they would undergrade themselves. And you have to go, no, you're doing this right. You start to find out if they're sort of losing a little bit of confidence in what they're doing. They start to give themselves poor checks. And again, it's not great, so I don't want to say grades. But they'll undersell what they've been doing. And then you can go, no, I have you up here, you're doing it right, so keep that up. So there's some positive reinforcement there too. Question? Did that explain it?
Do you ever focus on the musical aspect of it and like how they're playing?
Yeah, I mean this is we would constantly be working on those things too. I would only use this to assess what I believe the setup to fundamental setup that will allow them to succeed. I think with their playing. I really think that if their posture is rock solid and their embouchure is correct and they're playing with great ear support, then I think they're going to make good sounds. And then you have to assess the musical playing also. And you can put comment sections on there for that too. But this is just something like you can assess these things, and it's the same way every time. You know, so we would spend a lot of time the first 2 years getting all these things in place, and while working on musical things as well. And then when they got to 6th grade or 7th grade, then we would really start hammering on all the musical elements too. But I wanted to make sure we got these things in place for every instrument. So, and it also helps if you have to teach instruments that you don't really know anything about. I had to read lots of books on flute just to come up with a checklist because I didn't know anything about flute. And then I would learn more about flutes, and then I became a better flute teacher. And I mean, you heard the piccolo section of marching band; it sounded fantastic. So, yeah, Sam, right?
Yeah.
All right, so okay, assessment and interview. So you're gonna have to like interview soon. And if you walk into an interview, you don't have to use this, but if you walk in and the school principal says, okay, how are you going to assess performance? It's very subjective. How can you assess it? I don't know what you're going to answer. Your answer is going to be. When I went to interview in Pennsylvania, I talked about this stuff. I had handouts. You can go to like Staples or anything and get these little packets, they're like 20-page packets, they're $4 or $5. And I filled it with all the stuff that I wanted to talk about. I put a beginning clarinet lesson plan. I put a 5-step process for learning concert F blues, solo for trombone. I put a fake lesson plan in with the school's name at the top. You'd be so surprised how excited an adult would get if they look at a lesson plan. They go, oh, then they'll go, oh, that's our school's name. It sounds it sounds ridiculous, but they look at that kind of stuff. And actually, so what I would do, so I would have like 10 booths, and they're cheap. I pass them out to everybody in the interview. I'd stand up front, and if anybody would say, all right, well, how are you going to assess your kids? I'd say, okay, turn to page 18, and they'd open up their book, and everybody would have one. They'd open it up, and then I would just give them a rundown of how I planned on doing that. They happen to like this because they like students assessing themselves. If you can make it visual, they like that. And if you can incorporate technology, they like that too. So it's things that's appealing to them. And then I just had it in here. I had everything I wanted to talk about in here. I would really highly recommend these. They're so cheap. You go in with you have your own portfolio, and it's 50 pages long or 100 pages long, and you pass it around. They're really not going to look at it. So much stuff. But they each have their own thing, and you can even tell them, because if they're visual learners, you can say, all right, turn to page this, and they open it up, and they have what you're talking about. And they're really cheap and easy to make. So I would highly recommend getting some of these if you have an interview. It makes you look like you're very prepared for that too. So I would really highly recommend spending some time thinking about, before you go into an interview, thinking about how you want to assess your kids. It doesn't have to be this, but if you want to use it as an option, that's why I put all the information in the handout. I think it's a good idea to be prepared to talk about this, or assessment in general. They will probably ask you an assessment question. It's not good to go, well, you know, even though we all know when you're directing a choir or a band or doing a general music class, you're constantly assessing them with your ears all the time. But they won't get that. They don't understand that if they're not a musician. So, and then I just, here's some text. I used Dr. Brooklyn's book for some of this, and then there's a great Arts Propel handbook out there that has all of this, this kind of stuff in it. So, are there any questions? Anything? We didn't make it a full hour. I'm not disappointed.
One quick question. Did you, how did you apply this like to percussion? Because like a lot of stuff would transfer to that, but some of it might not transfer.
What I found worked really well from them is like hand, like what we would call playing position, hand position. And like, so we would work on, and the people that I worked with while we were there, we were constantly trying to get them to keep their palms down when they're playing, you know? And so we would put a quarter on their hand and have them play. But when they're watching the video, you'd watch the video and they'd be, you know, so there wouldn't be air support, there wouldn't be embouchure, but we had a hand position, and we had one was a hand position, and then one was just the whole body, where it was like if the drum wasn't set up at the right height and standing this way, are they playing over the best resonating sound spot of the drum? Are they holding the sticks correctly? And we had a rubric for all of that too. I had to call some percussion friends to help me with some of that stuff. But you've got colleagues, so if you don't know anything about saxophone and you want to make a saxophone rubric, call one of your friends who knows how to play. You know, or, God forbid, pay attention in your Methodist classes. Any other questions? Sam?
I mean, it was really probably naturally reinforcing, like you said, for them to watch their videos on the computer, but do you think it would be effective to implement some kind of like reward system, like if you see them improving, to get some kind of, like maybe this for like, I don't know, younger kids? Or...
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could do that. Absolutely, you could. Well, I mean, I did a couple different reward systems, and it wasn't necessarily along with this. You mentioned musical aspects. They would have to, this would always be optional, but we had, you probably heard about it, we did like band karate, where if they played number 81, which was Frere Jacques, if they played that and all of the musical elements were in place, then they would earn their red belt. Then they could go on and they'd play number 121, Ode to Joy, and if they played all the musical things correctly, they would earn their, what's next? Who does karate? Abby, what's after the red belt? So, you know what I mean? And so you can put a display in your room and you can have all of those, and you take little pieces of colored string and they just tie it on their case. So they have all their belts, and they're like, kids, they just go crazy. If they think they can, you know, because if they're playing a band, they're probably maybe not like karate type people. Maybe chickens. If you get the black belt or something, they tend to like that. We took Monopoly money and Photoshop music stuff on it. They had band bucks. They could earn band bucks for practice time, and then they could use that to buy music pencils, or they could buy, you know, stickers, stuff like that. So they would come in and be like, you know, you practiced 30 minutes this week, that's a bad week. You practiced 30 minutes this week, you get $2 and then they would save it. And they'd walk around, and they would have all their money, and some of the kids actually made homemade wallets, and they put their money in it. So you can think of, but you could apply some of those things to this too. You could if you wanted to. I found that just by having it very clearly outlined and just having the graph, they would take it seriously. I mean, nobody, as soon as you make it visual, nobody wants to be bad at anything. So if they come in and they're constantly seeing them down here, and they talk to each other, and they know who's down there and who's up here, and they don't want to be down there anymore. So they start to work harder, and over time you see them raise it up. So.
And have you been conducting actual research between the comparing the original evaluation and the art school help, and how the results are different? Even if it's not your research, but do you see any of research to compare those things?
I mean, maybe that might be helpful. I remember there was one class of students incoming. The first year that I was here, I did it when I was in New York, but when I took a job in Pennsylvania, I didn't start out with it because I was swamped. I was doing 5 through 12 band. I was doing the whole program. So I wasn't able to implement it right away because it was a train wreck when I got there. But I noticed the second year when I used it, I felt like the fundamentals of how they played their instrument got much better. Because they were thinking about it. I mean, everybody talks posture the first 2 weeks in the beginning band lesson. Everybody talks posture. And then you go observe a classroom 3 months from that. People aren't talking about it anymore. And it will get worse. You have to keep reminding them. So if they know they're being assessed on it every month, they'll maintain those chops, I guess. Yeah?
But before you ask your students to evaluate your own performance, did you share the highest thing or usually or something that you students? So what are you really looking for? Did you share with your students?
Oh, like did I demonstrate these things? Oh, yeah. And it would be, and again, it's about making it as visual as possible. So I would always demonstrate, and usually, if five kids would come in for the assessment day, I'd like remember, you know, in clarinet, you know, you have to have this. They switch this all the time if they're young. So you go over all of the things again with them if you needed to. And I would play every instrument in the lesson. Clarinet, flute, everything. So I could demonstrate that constantly to them. For example, embouchure. If you say to a kid, hey, you can fix your embouchure is not correct. Well, they know what it's supposed to look like. There's a picture of it in the book, and they see you doing it. They don't see themselves doing it. They get that from the video. You can go to the store and buy $5 locker room mirrors and glue one to 6 or 7 stands in your room. So when they come in, pull that stand out, put it down, have them do a warm-up before they do this, have them look in the mirror when they're playing their warm-up. So they're looking at their embouchure. All they're doing is looking at their embouchure and they're playing their warm-up. So they see what it looks like. And you demonstrate it to them, and they have to know what they're doing. Because they probably know what it's supposed to look like. They just don't even know if they're doing it or not because they can't see themselves while they're playing. So they get to play and they go and they watch it, and then they actually get to see themselves. And it makes a whole lot more sense. As soon as they watch it, they'll go, oh yeah, look at that. You know, I'm resorting back to these things that I'm not supposed to be doing. Does that answer your question?